I'm Liz Davey, and usually we start my program, A Walk in the Garden, in my garden. But today we're going to do a little special program on preserving the harvest. And frost is on its way. Actually, it may be even sooner than we had anticipated. So we want to get some of the things out of the garden and into the freezer or canning jars before that happens. I'm going to show you some of the ways that I safely preserve food and talk about a few others. I'm going to start with roasting some tomatoes. I have lots of these small tomatoes. They're a small plum, large cherry tomato. And what I've done is wash them well and then cut them in half and put them on a foil-lined baking sheet. And over these I'm going to drizzle a little of the olive oil. Just a little bit. And then I'm going to put them in a 250-degree oven. And I'm going to roast them and dry them at the same time. And this is going to take several hours. So I'm going to check them every hour and then more often during the end of the cycle. But we'll put them in the oven and I'm going to set the timer there for 1 hour. And then I'll be sure to check them to see how they're doing. I can also turn on my oven light if you have one so you can peek in. During the last part of their process, you want them to be dried. They'll go down to about 1/3 of their volume right now. And then I will take them off the baking sheet, let them cool, take them off the baking sheet, and store them in the freezer in plastic bags. They will not be dry enough to be shelf stable. And I'm not sure they would survive in our humidity. Now, even if you could get them dry enough, but they will store well in the freezer and then they can be brought out and used like you would use the oil-packed sun-dried tomatoes that you buy in the store. It's a savings of money because those are quite expensive, and they're very good on pizza or in pasta dishes or in other dishes where you just want a little bit of tomato flavor. The next thing I'm going to do is process some kale for freezing. Now, kale will last in the garden for a very long time, and I'll be able to pick it fresh probably until November. But if it's covered with snow, it's hard to get out and pick it, even if it's still there. So what I want to do is put some in the freezer. And this kale has been washed, and also I've cut out the large stems. And I'm going to process this by blanching it. And to blanch something, you put it in boiling water for a certain amount of time. And for this one, it's going to be 2 minutes, and you want to time that pretty exactly. And we'll put the lid on so that we can steam any that didn't go into the boiling water. And let that boil. And while it's boiling, during those 2 minutes, what this does is it inactivates the enzymes that are in products before you freeze them, mostly vegetables, and it inactivates the enzymes that cause spoilage. It results in a better product. You can freeze without blanching, but your product will suffer both in color, texture, and flavor. This will allow you to maintain a nice color and a nice texture and flavor. Of course, the texture will be less. These kale greens will be used in cooked dishes, and they will not be available for kale chips or any of the other fresh uses in salads. But they are nice to have for winter soups and stews. So this is why I like to put some of it in the freezer to have for later. And there goes our timer. We have 1 more minute. The pot's boiling away. I'm using a spaghetti cooker, and I like this pot because it has a strainer right in it so that I can lift it out of the water without having to use a strainer to dip it out. Saves a little time and a little energy. You can use a strainer or sieve to remove the kale after you've put it into the boiling water. And after the 2 minutes are over, they almost are, immediately take it out, and we want to cool it down quickly. So I will take it out of the pot and get the water out of it, and then I'm going to plunge this pot and all into ice cold water. And again, we want to leave it in there for about 2 minutes, and you can time that. Later on, I will give a link to a site where you can get dependable canning and freezing information. Or it's time to take it out of the cold water bath. And again, I'll shake it around and drain it. And then I'm going to put it on towels. And spread it out. And roll it up in the towel. We want to get it as dry as possible now before we freeze it. You'll notice it still has a nice bright green color. Here's some that I did a little earlier, just a little bit, so that I can show you. The next thing I'll do is put it on a dry baking sheet. This kale's pretty dry. And spread it out. Getting it good and dry is one of those secrets so that it doesn't end up being in big clumps. So you can pour out the amount that you need for a smoothie or to put in a soup. Many people do use kale in smoothies, and if you grow it, it's very easy to grow. This is a good way to preserve it. Then this will go into my freezer, and after it comes out, it has been frozen on the baking sheet, I'll put it in a plastic bag and label it for longer storage. The next thing I want to make is some basil pesto. Basil is one of the first things to go in the garden, so you really need to process it while you've got it. And one of the best ways to save basil, which turns black if you put it in the refrigerator, is to put it into pesto. And what I want to do is combine about 3 cups of basil with 2 good-sized cloves of garlic and half a cup of almonds or pine nuts or walnuts. Any type of nut will work. And then I'm going to spin this in the processor. Now that it's well chopped, I'm going to add about 7/8 of a cup of olive oil. There are various pesto recipes. Now I need to use the spatula to scrape it down a little bit so that it all gets combined. And at the same time, I'll add 2 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. Some people don't add the cheese until after they go to use the pesto. I add a little now and then some later when you use it. Once it's firmly pulverized, I'm going to put the pesto into an ice cube tray. And I'll just fill a few to show you what I'm doing, and then add the rest later. Once it's frozen, I'll pop these out of the ice cube tray and put them in a plastic bag for storage. Put that up here along with the kale. Another thing we can do in an ice cube tray is herbs, fresh herbs. They won't be fresh anymore, but they are better than some of the dried herbs, and that goes for things like cilantro. You can freeze cilantro just in a little plastic bag, or you can put that in an ice cube tray and add either olive oil or water and freeze it that way. These cubes can then be added to dishes that you're making and subtract the amount of olive oil or water that you put in the ice cube tray. Again, you have these nice little cubes that you can take out one or two whenever you need a little touch of cilantro in something. Again, they aren't going to be that usable for things like fresh salsa, but they are good in cooked dishes, and if you have the cilantro, you might as well freeze it or use it. I'm going to use a little olive oil on these. The olive oil will solidify. And again, you can store these. Be sure to label it because about next February you may not know what you have in the freezer unless you put a label on the bag. Another thing that freezes well are peppers, and you don't have to do anything with peppers to freeze them. They freeze really well, and you can cut them up and use them in cooked dishes. These are jalapeno peppers, hot peppers, and I've removed the seeds. You might want to use gloves when you do that, unless you're sure you're going to not touch your face or your eyes. They're a little hot, and they can just be packed in plastic bags and put in the freezer. Try to get as much of the air out of the bag as you can. They work very well. You can take them out one at a time and cut them up to put in casseroles and other things. The other thing I have are tomatillos, and they're just starting to ripen up and hopefully won't get too damaged by frost. Tomatillos are often called husk tomatoes, and they're used in green salsa. And also they can be used in sauces. Tomatillo chicken is one of the things that I like to make with them. And they freeze well without doing too much to them. It's possible to can them, but it requires pressure canner and more technique. But they do freeze quite well. They won't, again, maintain their crispy texture, but you can just put them in the bags. And I washed them and peeled the husk off and washed them. They have kind of a sticky surface if you don't wash them. And then again, excluding the air, pack them in a plastic bag, and there are tomatillos. For keeping parsley, parsley will keep extremely well and fresh if you just wash it, and with the water from the washing still on it, you pack it in a glass jar. Now it's important to have a glass jar and not a plastic jar because it will not last nearly as long. I have packed parsley at this point in time, October time frame, late September, and had it last almost till Christmas. So you can have it last a long time. I'll probably do another jar with the plain leaf parsley. This is the parsley that's, and this will just store in the refrigerator for quite a long time. This is the plain leaf and curled leaf parsley. And you can also, if you wish to freeze parsley to use in cooking, just put it in a plastic bag in a roll, tight roll, and then you can cut off a portion to be used for cooking. But it stores so well in the refrigerator, I prefer it fresh. Now it comes to canning, and canning is a little trickier. With freezing, you aren't killing bacteria, but you are slowing it down so that it doesn't continue to produce more bacteria. And of course, you wash the produce to get as much cleanliness as you can. With canning, you are actually killing bacteria because you're going to be storing this at a temperature where bacteria would grow rapidly. And you want to also exclude air. This is a problem for some things because there are some bacteria that are not killed easily. And one of those is botulism. And botulism you can't taste and you can't see or smell, but it can kill you, actually, and you really don't want it in your canned products. Other bacteria will cause spoilage that you can see, and you'll open the can and want to throw it out. It's important to use safe procedures for canning. There are two ways to can. One involves a boiling water bath, which is a large kettle that will cover any jars you put in it by at least 2 inches of boiling water. And there's usually a rack so you can lift the jars in and out of this boiling water bath. All of these things that I've made have been done in a boiling water bath. There are certain procedures for certain vegetables. You need to have enough salt or enough acid in any low acid fruit or vegetable to enable safe canning. If there isn't enough acid, your product will not be safe and botulism can be allowed to grow. It grows extremely well when air is excluded. It's called an anaerobic bacteria, and that means without air. And this is the perfect place for it to grow unless you have followed safe canning procedures. It's killed at about 240 degrees. Now you can boil these cans in a boiling water canner for a long time, and the water will only get to 210 degrees at most. Therefore, some vegetables, and not any fruits, but some vegetables will require a pressure canner, which allows you to achieve a higher temperature. There are so many things on Pinterest and Facebook and all over, plus old recipes from your grandmother, your great aunt, that really aren't that safe anymore. For one thing, tomatoes have been found. They were always something that you could can safely in a water bath canner with no problem. But now modern tomatoes have less acid, and they aren't as safe anymore unless you add acid. And safe canning directions will tell you how much acid to add and what to add. Either citric acid or bottled vinegar of a certain acidity can be added to your tomatoes, just a little bit, but it's enough to ensure that they can be safely canned in a water bath canner. Otherwise, you will need to use a pressure canner. Now, that does not mean that you can use your Instant Pot. It doesn't achieve enough pressure to give you enough heat to safely can products. Of course, if you want to can something like meat, you definitely have to use a pressure canner. You can safely do pickles and relish and jams in a water bath canner. But again, it's helpful to look at specific recipes and techniques. And if you follow current models, they're always coming up with some new things, safer ways to do it, safer times, safer additions. The USDA.gov site, if you do a search on safe canning, will lead you to the latest information on safe canning and what techniques you can use to ensure that your products are safe. They also have plenty of instructions and recipes for freezing produce and tell you when you need to blanch it and how long. So it's a very good site to have as bookmarked on your computer if you plan to do a lot of preserving, and it will help you do it safely. There are so many methods that are not safe. A lot of salsa recipes are currently online, and it's easy to think you can just can something. Put it in a can, turn it upside down, and it will seal. And yes, it will seal, but the product will not be safe necessarily. I would rather be safe than trust to my luck on anything like that. Oven canning is another thing. Microwave canning. Neither of those have proved to be safe, sure methods for canning your produce. So do look up USDA.gov and search for safe methods so that you can produce nice products for your family that are also safe. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, usually found on A Walk in the Garden, and today I'm preserving things from my garden to eat this winter.